Hello, hello, hello. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the live stream. So, today I'll be doing a breakdown of affirmative action across the world, and we'll try to make a case that reservation is not only a flop idea but a dangerous idea, and it has so many flaws that the only reform that can be done is either make it irrelevant or simply discard it. In our case, since it is so sacred, so we should move in the direction of making it irrelevant. So let's start with the video by a summary, a short summary of a book written by Affirmative Action Across the World, written by Thomas Sowell. So let's start with the video, and I'll do a breakdown of all this. Let's go.
Many, if not most, people who are for or against affirmative action are for or against the theory of affirmative action. The factual question of what actually happens as a result of affirmative action policies receives remarkably little attention. Close quote. Why?
Oh, you'd have to ask those people why. I mean, to me, the first question is, well, what actually happens when you do this stuff? But most people seem to be locked into whatever position they're locked into. They think it's wonderful or they think it's terrible on the basis of what they imagine.
Let's look at some of the data.
First thing that we all need to recognize is that let's think of the entire question from a neutral point of view. Like basically, what objective are you trying to achieve, and is reservation helping it in it or not? I think we can agree that the problem exists, and let's debate what solution it can be, and let's consider reservation as one of the many solutions to trying an objective of social upliftment. I think we all can agree on this.
Yeah. Once again, from affirmative action around the world, quote, India has had affirmative action programs longer than any other nation, beginning in the British colonial times and then provided for in its constitution when it became an independent country in 1947, close quote. Take us through this. In India, affirmative action is for whom?
Initially, it was for the untouchables, who are probably among the most persecuted people on earth. At a time when blacks in the South had to sit in the back of the bus, untouchables weren't supposed to sit anywhere. They were to stand in the back of the bus. And then it just goes on from there.
This is what percentage of the population?
About, if I remember correctly, about 16%.
16%, and these are people who are so low they don't even count in the caste system.
No, that's right. That's right. Treated abominably. And so it's understandable people want to do something to make things better for them.
This fact, no one denies that there was persecution going on, and severe social discrimination was going on against lower castes. This everyone agrees that the severe discrimination against Dalits was going on. No one disagrees on it. Now this doesn't mean that everywhere it was happening. Now this doesn't mean that everywhere it was uniform. Now it doesn't mean that every person was saying the same. But we can agree to a certain extent. In general, discrimination definitely existed. We all can agree that this was a problem, and even if this discrimination didn't exist, a whole lot of population was severely below poverty line. We all can agree on that.
What actually happened, however, is that extremely few untouchables actually are able to make use of any of these preferences and quotas.
The preferences and quotas are for hiring or education, or what form do they take?
They're actually for hiring, for education, for seats in parliament. But of course, for all those things, you have to have various complementary resources. So it doesn't do you any good if you're somebody out in a little village where you're struggling to make ends meet, that there's a place reserved for you in the medical school. And you'll be lucky if you can make it to high school.
Is that a case of affirmative action badly aimed? Meaning, should there be more economic resources? Should that be the kind of affirmative action? Should they be?
अभी एक common notion होता है कि अपना कि if they do not have the resources और उस वजह से they are not able to take advantage of it. अब आप यही assume करके चलो ना कि across the spectrum everyone has minimal or no resources, जो कि absolute lie है, क्योंकि इसका कोई data नहीं है, ये सिर्फ एक notion है. और इसी वजह से फिर क्या होता है कि those who have few advantages due to network effects, तो उस वजह से क्या होता है, those who have advantages they are able to take more advantages, or this is how you end up having a creamy layer of well connected individuals who help each other to and uplift their particular community, क्योंकि because of the social connections that we have. Network effects is something that is very little talked about. Okay, because you know people and those people know other people, this results in you having an advantage over those who are fresh to the market and who no one trusts. क्योंकि जिस सोसाइटी में लॉ एंड ऑर्डर प्रॉपरली फंक्शन है वहाँ पे ये इतनी बड़ी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, मगर जिस सोसाइटी में लॉ एंड ऑर्डर प्रॉपरली फंक्शनिंग नहीं है एंड यू हैव टू रिलाई ऑन फैमिली कनेक्शंस टू गेट अहेड इन लाइफ, वहाँ पे ये प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट होती है. तो जो प्रॉब्लम एक्चुअली लैक ऑफ सोशल नेटवर्क्स की थी, भाई यू डिडंट नो सफिशिएंट पीपल टू गेट अहेड, उस प्रॉब्लम को डिस्क्रिमिनेशन की प्रॉब्लम बना दिया, जो कि सभी फेस कर रहे थे. दोज whoever didn't belong to a community, he was discriminated against regardless. तो इस वजह से ये ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट हुई उसके मुकाबले कि you belong to this caste तो तुम्हारे साथ ये किया जाएगा. Okay.
Targeting Milton Friedman's old idea of negative income tax. Should they just be putting cash in the hands of untouchables?
That wouldn't be affirmative action, I guess. Well, affirmative action really is preferences and quotas.
Okay.
But the thing is for which they create preferences and quotas, not only in India but in other countries around the world, are typically things that the elite would be interested in. College admission, government jobs, seats in parliament. And for that, you have to have other resources. So what we call untouchables is if they're one sort of...
This is very little talked about. Why are these specific things are being selected? Why are government jobs being selected? Why these? Because these things have a specific appeal, and the political caste has appeal. Political caste is, these things are appealing to the political caste, although they may have no or little value to the society as a whole.
Uniform group is really a collection of many different groups. Many of them are separate from each other and do not intermarry or whatnot. And the ones of the untouchables, there are some who are prosperous for one historical reason or another. And they grab off the lion's share of all these benefits. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of untouchables are completely cut off from these things.
Let me quote you again. This is from your conclusion about India. It is hard to escape the conclusion that affirmative action in India has produced minimal benefits to those most in need and maximum resentments and hostility toward them on the part of others.
Yes.
Now
this is the thing that is the most harmful about this entire thing. You perpetuate casteism more by reservations because you create resentment more. You create the feeling that he is someone else, since he is getting advantages over me, even though I have done nothing wrong to them, or anyone near me has done anything wrong to them. Why is he getting preferential treatment over me when I have done nothing wrong? So this creates resentment that against and hostility against a particular community, that why are you being given special treatment when we believe in equality? And this equality among equals is some Animal Farm talk, like some are more equal than others. So this is one of the root causes of why it is such a sensitive topic and why people are so polarized about it, because this goes against the principle that we hold in the preamble, that equality, liberty, equality. It is against equality that you are giving someone preferential treatment, and that is the foundational flaw of the reservation policy, that you are giving preference someone on based of the community he belongs to, not the merit he has, or society has agreed that this has to. This is just political caste trying to consolidate a particular section, calling them up by labeling them as you are oppressed and you need to be given handouts because you will never be able to rise up if the system was normal. This is the story that has been sold to the lead. This is the story that is sold by the so-called leaders. They are no leaders. They are just interested in keeping their family privileges alive. The so-called leaders of the backward castes.
Second piece of this, why should it be that affirmative action should increase the resentment toward untouchables?
Because if there are 100 jobs there, and 3 of them have been set aside for and 3 untouchables are actually able to make use of the set-asides for them, then everybody who lost a job will say he would have been hired if it only been the untouchables hadn't grabbed him.
This is what policymakers don't understand, that human beings are human beings. They have a psychology. That's what they operate on. Policies have to be made keeping in mind not your vague objectives but the psychology that people operate in. And this is this is what they simply lack, and this is simply eschew. They think that human beings are simply pawns and we can move them anywhere we want, and we just have to frame the right policy and then the right outcome will happen. Things don't happen like that. People have counter reactions. They have counter reactions to counter reactions. There are second order, third order, fourth order effects you cannot predict, and this is why even after 75 years, reservation will still remain a problem, because people will keep resenting those who are more privileged than them.
Now, there may be 50 people seething with anger at not having gotten these free jobs. But had there been no untouchables, 47 of them wouldn't have gotten the jobs anyway.
I see.
And so you create a resentment out of all proportion to the actual benefits that have been transferred.
You write that although India has had this policy of affirmative
And if you are aiming for social harmony, this simply won't do it.
many decades, violent incidents toward untouchables never fell below 13,000 a year during the 1980s and actually rose to more than 20,000 a year during the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
Question: would you go so far as to argue that the untouchables themselves would have been better off had India never instituted affirmative action programs?
It's a tough one, but I would lean towards saying yes.
On what basis?
On the basis that so few of them have gotten anything at all, and all of them have suffered from the backlash.
I see.
Our next case study takes us from India to Southeast Asia.
Malaysia, one of the more prosperous countries of Southeast Asia, population 23 million. Of those 23 million, about half are Malays, a quarter are Chinese, and about 7% are Indians. Care to give us a brief history of the affirmative action programs in Malaysia?
The Chinese, first of all, were making at least twice the income of the Malays.
So what you have there is a minority. A quarter of the population is doing far better than than the larger number of indigenous people.
Yeah. And what makes it even worse,
Let's think of let's think of it in first principles, that there is this key reservation where this affirmative action psychology come from. It is a minority being successful than the majority, and then the majority resenting the minority for it. This is the basic psychology behind introducing affirmative actions. And since we are in a democratic system, the politicians try to rile up the resentment that is in the majority against the minority, so that they can get their votes, get them elected, and under the promise that I will bring you justice and persecute the minority in some way, and by persecuting the minority and stealing from them, I will be able to give you justice, which is currently what the shady parties that proto-communist party that is and its leader and its crazy leader is doing around right now. It is nothing new. It is an old script that has been followed across the world. And now let's see what happens in Malaysia, where the outcome was way better than the current way the one we have, and that is why we as libertarians propose, and the solution that we libertarians propose is why we have a case study that this is the evidence that the vision that we have will be able to deliver results as compared to anything that the current political discourse is going on, and why the discourse should be actually be about this rather than talking how many percentage of reservation should we have, or what reservation we should have.
politically, I guess, is that the Chinese started out much poorer than the Malays, and passed them over the years simply because they had more, they saved more, they worked harder, etc. So the Chinese were very much resented, and in 1969, for a number of reasons, there was this riot of Malays against the Chinese. And in order to calm this down, the government then put in a massive program of preferences for the Malays in the universities and government employment and so on.
Who was in the government? Was the government dominated by Malays?
The government has always been dominated by Malays. But before, you see, in the university, for example, the admission was just by qualifications. And so an absolute majority of the people in the universities were Chinese. And as you went into the more difficult subjects like science and math, they were overwhelmingly Chinese. So that, for example, in the decade of the 1960s, the Chinese...
Now this is not directly related to it, but somehow related to it. That why do some people earn more than others? Well, obviously that's because they are in more valuable fields than others. If someone is doing scientific work, if someone is doing engineering, if someone is doing being a doctor, he will obviously earn more than who is doing a simple job of a manual labor. That's simply that's simply the market rate for the services he is providing. He is easily replaceable. There is so much competition for his job. Naturally, prices will come down. So this people don't have understanding that where do salaries come from. Salaries come from the market value of things, and if there is not if market value of your labor isn't there, or is and if you aren't sufficiently scarce, then no one would value it, and wages will automatically be low. But I don't think any economics teacher talks about it that much.
400 degrees in engineering. The Malays receive 4. So if
That's a little hard for the Malays to take.
Yes, yes.
And so the government does what in 1969?
But they start putting in preferences for the Malays in all these different programs. And they set a goal that by 1990 the Malays will be represented equally in across the board in business and universities, etc.
And the result of these programs is?
One of the results has been that many of the Chinese have left Malaysia.
Oh, I see.
Thousands of them.
Just like that has happened in India, that many of those who are not able to get seats because of the reservation policy, the harsh reservation policy, they simply leave the country. They go to other countries and contribute in other countries.
Because they have a tough time getting into the universities, even though they have better qualifications. The government also changed the language of the schools from English to Malay. And the Chinese, of course, had learned to speak English, but they had not learned to speak Malay. So all of these things made life very difficult. They've also moved some of their capital out, so they've lost all that. Now, Malaysia was more fortunate than most countries in that they had a great deal of economic...
This is the most important thing that you need to listen to.
Malaysia was more fortunate than most countries in that they had a great deal of economic growth during this period. They have oil, which was very good for them during the 70s especially, and so they became a modernized country. They went from being a predominantly agricultural country to being a predominantly commercial and industrial country. All of that...
That is the libertarian vision. We are moved from agricultural country to an industrial and commercial country. Right now, 60% of the population is employed in agriculture, and you cannot have a modern country that is where 60% of the population is dependent on agriculture, which has the lowest revenue per square foot amongst all the industries. So this simply doesn't make any sense to have such large proportion. Out of 1 billion people, so many people are employed in agriculture. This is why the problem that you are trying to solve, the social upliftment that you need to do, can be achieved only through mass industrialization and letting free trade happen, letting the market open, cutting the regulations on all the atoms that we have. Then we'll have a proper possibility of social upliftment. People are able to exchange their labor for money in the market, and when the positive virtuous cycle starts, then eventually as they work harder, as they get more skilled, they get paid more. But right now, what the system that we have is that there is a price cap based on the level of agriculture output. There is agriculture goes at just 4-5%, so that will be the growth rate of the majorly of the economy. But when we enter industrial economy, then the growth rate increases. China has been able to do so well because they have industrialized the economy rather than relying on agriculture.
Often the blow, as it were, because there were now more engineers, more doctors, and so on. So that now you could have more Malay engineers and more Malay doctors without there being an absolute decline in the number of Chinese doctors or Chinese engineers.
Right.
Even though the proportions changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So they escaped much of this. The other thing which is crucial is that there is no free speech on ethic matters in Malaysia. That is, there are no Jesse Jacksons or Al Sharptons in Malaysia to keep things boiling. In fact, when I was there some years ago, I would get very candid discussions when I'm behind closed doors in people's offices. But the American Embassy arranged a dinner that evening for me, and most of those invited did not show because they dared not say anything in public, which would be a federal law.
Oh, I see.
In criticism of the program.
Right. You're right. Let me quote you to yourself again. No more than 5% of Malays, quote, have been estimated to have actually benefited from these affirmative action programs.
Yeah. Why isn't. See, this needs to be discussed. Like, why if so few people get the benefits out of it? The solution is that the policy is flop in itself. And why do so few people get benefit out of it? And then you will come to the conclusion that it is because of network effects and Matthew's law. Those who have more will have more. So this policy that is proposed as a sort of sort of door to nirvana simply is impossible and impractical, because first of all the government cannot create billions of jobs. Secondly, secondly, even that if that proposition, now you have to rely on every job needs to be a government job. So now the crazy lunatics propose that we should have private sector reservation to achieve social upliftment, rather than realizing that no, reservation is a flop. Still, if you introduce private sector reservation, first of all they are not enforceable. Secondly, even if you try to enforce them, people will leave. They don't want to, because businesses survive on competition, and you cannot handicap competition by saying that now you have to follow these rules and things like that. So you have killed the goose that lays the egg. And now what you're doing is that you are trying to, rather than cutting on the mistake that no, this reservation policy simply doesn't work. The premise is fundamentally wrong. This is why these are the principles. These are the reason why this policy will never work. Rather than curbing down the policy and focusing on real hard things that need to be done, you give simple, quick fix solutions that don't work, create resentment, destroy society, create generational resentments, create conflicts, and most importantly fails to achieve your objective. Now if anyone who proposes a reservation, this is simply trying to win elections. That's it. He doesn't care about the people. He doesn't, and he definitely doesn't care about the lower caste. He only cares about getting elected, giving them some quick fix, and then next election saying that oh, this didn't work because we didn't do it enough. And then the next step will be, we'll do it more, you will cross the 100%, then still it won't work, then we'll introduce in private sector, still won't work, then we'll confiscate their property, then it still won't work. And then eventually people will realize that this was the fundamental premise of reservation was wrong all along, that simply this system will never work. This is a flop policy.
And those people who were initially more fortunate were the most benefited, close quote. In other words, the pattern that we saw in India repeats itself in Malaysia. The ones who are already near the top, who
This puts them over the top.
right, they're capable of grabbing these jobs or the
Yes.
university positions.
Yes.
All right, but it's still a tiny percentage of the overall population.
Right.
All right, and you also write, if there's any lesson from the history of affirmative action in Malaysia, it is that extraordinary economic prosperity and growth, this tremendous boom time they underwent, combined with extraordinary repression of free speech,
Yes.
no Al Sharptons around to cause trouble,
Yes.
can make preferential programs viable. But to say that the country as a whole is better off would be to ignore many counterproductive consequences, close quote. The counterproductive consequences are
The flight of the Chinese, loss of them, to some extent the Indians as well, loss of Chinese capital. The fact Malaysia itself, the government, decided just within the past few years that they simply were not getting as many engineers and high-tech people that they need for the kind of economy they want. And so last year they announced that they're going to go back to simply having admission by academic qualifications at the university. So this is one of the few cases where a program has apparently come to an end.
And this is the goal that we are trying to achieve. Once we are an industrial economy, reservation will be irrelevant, because there will be reservation will be irrelevant because people wouldn't care about getting reservations, because they have so many opportunities in private sector. There will be, because of reservation policies, the negative effects of reservation will be so apparent to the society as a whole that people will be like that we need to get rid of it. When the people decide that we don't want reservation, politicians will get rid of reservations. It's all about convincing the people that reservations are against you, and the politicians just are trying to take advantage of it. It is a shit policy that politicians are trying to get elected for, and that is not the solution for the problem that we are thinking that it tries to address. The social upliftment of lower caste that we are trying to address. Reservation would not do it. Focus on industrialization, talk about jobs, and not government jobs. Talk about jobs that with over time can increases scale and increases skill, and can lead to higher salaries and higher wages.
Next case study, affirmative action and the civil war in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
Now, this is a dangerous scenario. This is one of the this is one of the bad cases where reservation policy resulted in some real hardcore violence, and Sri Lanka faced a civil war.
Population about 19 million, roughly 3/4 of the population Sinhalese, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Largest minority, the Tamils, represent about 1/6 of the population. I quote from Affirmative Action Around the World once again, since the middle of the 20th century, Sri Lanka has undergone a remarkable and catastrophic change in the relationship between its majority and minority populations. Explain.
Well, as of the time that Sri Lanka became an independent nation, at the on the late 40s,
Yes.
people inside and outside of Sri Lanka were holding it up to the world as an example of harmony between majorities and minorities, and saying we can learn from Sri Lanka because it's so peaceful that people get along together. There had, in the first half of the 20th century, there was not a single race riot between the Sinhalese and the Tamils. And there are many evidences of the amity between the two groups.
Do you have one? Is this a case where one group is substantially more prosperous
Oh,
than the
yes.
other?
Once again, the Tamils, who are the minority, are much more prosperous. And again, they're particularly good in things like science and math. And there are historical reasons for this. That in colonial...
Same story going on. Now we have a third case where where few people, because they were in the right fields, were able to were able to be better off as compared to vast majority who didn't enjoy the free market advantages, and simply were laid back. And then politicians came in and decided that let's rile them up and against the minority, get elected and oppress the minority.
The British and the Americans sent missionaries to Sri Lanka, Ceylon as it was called then. The British colonial officials gave the British missionaries the more posh assignments, and they sent the American missionaries up into the Jaffna Peninsula, which was a poorer area. But the Americans taught math and science more so than the British. And so ever since then, the Tamils have been much better at math and science than the Sinhalese. And one time, again, you found a wholly disproportionate number of the engineers, scientists, and people like that in Sri Lanka were Tamils, while the majority was lagging way behind. And again, this went along. This didn't disrupt
No
anything.
problem.
No problem until they became an independent nation, and until they began having elections. And one man, Solomon Bandaranaike,
Now this Solomon Bandaranaike, he resembles someone who is existing in India. I won't take name, but you will get to after watching his story, you will realize that he does resemble someone. That is a certain whatever adjective you would like to use, a certain individual. He aptly fits the description of similar to Bandaranaike. Yeah, go on.
to be prime minister, and so he pushed identity politics. The irony is that, like so many people who push identity politics, he was not really part of this group that he was being so strident about. Bandaranaike was he was not a
Similar to that leader who doesn't even belong to the community, and is trying to lead them to some great promised land.
Christian. He doesn't speak a word of Sinhalese. His father was his godfather was the British colonial governor.
He comes from the highest of the highest privileged backgrounds.
He studied at either Oxford or Cambridge. But when he comes back, he now suddenly takes off Western clothes, puts on Buddhist robes, learns some words of Sinhalese, and now he becomes more Sinhalese than thou.
Yeah, all these roaming around on the streets, eating food in their houses, roaming around in trucks, walking in hand in hand like that. All that is just a show.
And he pushes the idea that the Sinhalese ought to have all these preferences and quotas. And it's clear that it was only to get himself.
All this jiski jitni abadi utna hak nonsense. The Sri Lankan version, the Indian version of whatever Bandaranaike was trying to do in Sri Lanka.
They were the majority after.
That's right. And once he got elected, he lost interest in this stuff, and he's ready to work out some deal with the Tamils. But by this, he had worked people up so much with this identity stuff that now they turned on him and assassinated him. And since then, the subsequent leaders got the message clearly, and they began pushing extremism toward the Tamils. And eventually things got so bad because, you see, the Tamils really had a poor area, so education was their only real way up. Mm-hmm. And when they were shut out, not totally, but shut out to a great extent from the universities, they were desperate, and nothing would move the government, and eventually there was civil war. Mm-hmm. And in that civil war, this little country lost more people dead than the United States lost during the entire Vietnam War.
Sri Lanka, quoting you, represents a tragic mockery of the underlying assumption of being able to control the course of events, an assumption implicit in affirmative action policies around the world, yes. Close quote. That is to say, social engineers actually think they can engineer society.
Yeah, this social engineers, all these centralizers that we should have more centralization. Think before you say those things, because the consequences can be so devastating, and the strongest of the strongest governments can't control it, and your silly decisions can lead to so system-wide collapse. So before you propose any solution that this should be implemented across the country, think about it 100 times or even 1,000 times before taking even a single step, rather than brushing people off that people will do whatever I want them to do. Being a dictator doesn't work in the real world.
They think it and they say it. They just can't do it.
Yeah, but Tom, isn't that an assumption implicit in virtually all government policy? You educate the population because you think that the nation, whatever nation is in question, will become more prosperous as a result. You build strong defenses because you think that's a way of preventing war. I mean, what is distinctive about the assumption in affirmative action?
I guess it's the belief that you can sort of micromanage the result, and you can't. When you educate the people, you don't say, now you go off there and become a chemist, and you go become a draftsman and so forth. You educate them, and then you turn them loose and let them sort themselves out. With affirmative action, you're prescribing actual end results, and that's where you've gone beyond what you're capable of doing.
I see. All right.
Yeah. So even if the smartest person comes into charge, which is simply impossible, even let's suppose there's an exceptional case. Although I'm saying that the current leader isn't smart, even if the smartest person comes in charge for implementing reservation, the smartest, whatever a possible highest IQ is there, still people are people, and they will do things that the way they like, and see he's bound to fail. So this is a failed proposition from the start.
Return home to affirmative action in America.
I'm going to quote you yet again. The historical evolution of affirmative action in the United States would be difficult to understand without first realizing the first fact, the legal obstacles which such policies must overcome in order to be acceptable in American courts of law as well as in the political arena. Legal obstacles such as?
The 14th Amendment.
Fairly substantial legal obstacles.
That's right. And politically, you have to represent preferences and quotas as not being preferences and quotas. They're just being, and you have to represent them as being temporary.
The 14th Amendment says, or guarantees,
equal treatment of all citizens.
But individual basis.
That's right.
It is implicitly opposed to group.
See, this is the difference in the interpretation of the Constitution. Ours took the animal farm stand of equality of equals, rather than so the courts held that this policy cannot be implemented because it is discrimination, and then then even after that politicians managed to slip the affirmative action policy under the nose of the Constitution. R didn't do it that way. Everyone, since they created the environment in such a way that this is acceptable and this needs to be done, so they were able to do it in the Constitution itself. So this is where culture debates come in and culture wars come in. That you have to build the culture in such a way that the interpretation of concepts is under. We have a unified understanding of interpretation of concepts, and no crazy lunatic can bend the reality up to his will and create new meanings out of words that everyone agreed. So equality was meant, equal treatment meant that everyone is what the goal should have been was that if anyone is discriminated against, the discriminator will be prosecuted. The system should have focused on that, but no, they believe that no, this discrimination is bound to happen. Let's build a system in such a, rather than controlling the discriminator, they simply try to take him out, and which simply didn't happen, and they didn't focus on any legal reforms or judicial reforms.
That's right. Every citizen, not every group of citizens or whatnot. And so you've got to overcome that. And so you've got to.
This also indicates a certain focus on individualism, that we will treat everyone as individuals, not as some he belongs to this identity, so he's supposed to have these things.
This is really just an anti-discrimination policy, and that pretense gets pretty thin sometimes.
The transparent dishonesty with which quotas and preferences have been instituted and maintained here in the United States, you write, is a dishonesty reaching into the highest court in the land, as the Weber case demonstrates. Take us through what took place in the Weber case.
In the Weber case, Weber was a worker in a plant in Louisiana, and he wanted to get into a training program which would qualify him for higher jobs. And he was turned down, and blacks who had lesser qualifications than him were admitted. And so he took this to the Supreme Court. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 said individuals. And Justice Brennan, some of the great verbal sleight of hand, turned this around and said, well, but the real intent of Congress, you see, was this or that. And so he then ruled against Weber. And then when the dissenting opinion, Rehnquist said that this reminded him of the great escapes of Houdini, that the language was so plain and clear in the law itself. And it was also plain and clear if you got into the legislative history, where they talked about the possibility of quotas. And Hubert Humphrey, who was pushing the Civil Rights Act, said, I'll eat my hat if this thing turns out to quote into quotas. Well, he wasn't there to eat his hat.
It wasn't just Brennan who would have done it. The whole court since, and the court has upheld this kind of doctrine since, because without it, affirmative action programs simply cannot stand.
That's right.
All right. Affirmative action targeted in the United States originally at African Americans who suffer the obvious historical disadvantage of centuries of slavery. You write, however, that affirmative actions have programs and policies have mutated such that they now cover minority groups and women, quote, so that such policies now apply to a substantial majority of the...
Yeah, and this is why when the genie is out of the box, and now the discourse is going on that there will be 30% reservation in the parliaments for women. So this virus of a policy keeps mutating and keeps evolving and keeps encompassing more and more groups, because the aim of this policy is not to provide any social justice or upliftment. The aim is to divide people in such a way that politicians can rile them up in the best way. Every politician is trying to do that. I will do reservation in such a way, and whatever people like, because they have an agreement that reservation will lead to something good. They have this understanding that reservation will lead to something good. That is what politicians try to do. That we'll deliver you heaven of reservation. That is the reservation policy will help us achieve. And this is my take on reservation policy. This is my take on reservation policy. This is my take on reservation policy. So in some way, it is their version of creating a utopia. Now, since they have won the culture war already, each one is trying to present a variation of the already existing reality, which is fake, but still people believe that this reservation will lead to something good. So they are trying to present their own variation, like EW's reservation is good. I don't reservation for the creamy layer and things like that, ignoring the fact that same problem will arise again. New creamy layer will emerge, then new creamy layer will emerge, then new creamy layer will emerge, and still the problem will persist. And when the problem persists and there is resentment that this is failing, then they'll try to create some new group, maybe based on some community, maybe based on some religion, maybe based on gender. They'll keep trying to divide people, whip their emotions, and try to get them to vote, because who doesn't want privileges? And if people want privileges, then the politicians will try to sell them privileges. And when the constitution and the courts hold that you can sell out villages, sold out privileges for votes, then politicians will do it because the aim is to win elections.
Population, close quote. How did that happen?
Oh, as in India and other countries, that once the goodies out there, politicians at every election have a tendency to want to hand those goodies out to more and more people to get more and more votes. And similarly in India, that the vast majority of people who are entitled to preferences now greatly outnumber the untouchables. And the ones who are able to use them greatly outnumber them even more so. So that you completely get away from the rationale. I think one of the more striking cases to me was in San Francisco, where in this elite high school, white students are admitted with lower scores than Chinese American students. Now, it's hard to see how the treatment of blacks really justifies any of that.
Affirmative action for whites.
Yeah, that's right. But once you've set it in motion, this is where, again, you see, you can't control the course of events the way you imagine. And so you end up with this kind of anomaly, which has nothing to do with the original rationale.
Quote again, benefits to black millionaires are far more demonstrable than benefits to blacks in poverty, close quote.
Yes.
Explain that one.
Oh, black millionaires can have
How many stories do we have that children of IAS officer ends up being a certain topper IAS? Her parents were themselves in government jobs and government services and civil servants. So how many repeat stories do we have to see to realize that maybe this policy is unimplementable and we cannot debate and we simply need to scrap it. This is just one group trying to lobby for it and trying to get advantages for their own children because they know they have advantage, and under the garb of being a victim of some imaginary system, they just try to preserve the privileges that their family has.
advantage over white millionaires when it comes to buying radio station licenses. Now, the kid living in poverty in Harlem or Watts is not likely to be up for a radio station license. And similarly with medical school benefits and so forth. All of that is for people who already have a certain amount, and this puts them over the top. It enables the sons of black doctors to go to Harvard, more easily than the sons of white doctors.
Okay. Now, Tom, the argument would be black Americans do suffer from the historical facts of slavery. So affirmative action is a reasonable thing. It's simply gotten out of hand or been permitted to be corrupted, right? What's wrong with that argument?
Well, if you confine yourself to the United States, that may sound plausible, which is the very reason I did a worldwide study, because exactly the same thing has happened in every country in which it's been tried. The classic case was Pakistan, where the affirmative action was put in for people in East Pakistan who were way behind the people in West Pakistan. Fine. But again, as time goes on, these goodies get handed out to more and more people. And the irony in that case is that East Pakistan seceded and became the independent nation of Bangladesh, and the program keeps going right on because there are enough other constituencies. So when this happens again and again and again, you can't say this is just an aberration, that something that went wrong. It always goes wrong.
Yes, it always goes wrong because the fundamental premise is wrong.
Let's look at the common patterns that affirmative action programs around the world seem to share.
Pattern one, virtually everywhere you argue affirmative action programs are intended as temporary measures.
Yeah, like we had the 10-year provision that has been continued unanimously for 70 years, and if the current system continues, it will go on for another 100 years, maybe another 1,000 years. Who knows? If libertarians, but I think that anyway, libertarians will rise anyway. But still, if people don't wake up, then these policies will continue and keep expanding.
Become permanent.
Yes.
Why is that?
Again, politically, it's hard to say no and it's easy to say yes if you're in politics because you're spending somebody else's money. You'll be blamed for saying no. You will not be blamed for saying yes. And it won't cost you a dime. And so you keep expanding these things outward, onward and outward. In the United States, for example, some have argued that white women have benefited more than blacks from affirmative action. And partly the reason is that there are more white women with the complementary resources like college education and so forth. And what that means is that in some cases, blacks may be worse off in the sense that a given job that a black man may be better qualified to do, let's say, may not go to him because you've now made college a requirement for the job. And it goes to someone else who's more likely to have gone to college.
Pattern 2. Affirmative action programs tend to exacerbate rather than ameliorate tensions among different groups.
Yes.
That's not just the case in India, but you argue that that tends to be the case wherever affirmative
Yes.
action is instituted.
Yes. The classic example is Bakke. Neither Bakke nor the
Bakke Supreme Court case.
Yes, neither Alan Bakke nor the people on the other side were able to show that he would or would not have been admitted to the university had there been no affirmative action. And so we don't know that Bakke lost anything. But Bakke himself was sufficiently aggrieved that he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. And he was then admitted, which he might not have been admitted had there been no affirmative action for blacks.
And there are lots and lots of Alan Bakkes.
Yes.
And in a situation where political correctness would suggest that you don't complain in public, this forces the grievance
Yes.
out of the
Underground.
political discourse, underground.
That's right.
This is the pattern that you identify, you return to this again and again. Even where affirmative action programs have been in place for decades, almost nobody ever examines the actual results.
That's right.
How come?
There's no political payoff for looking at the facts. And what do you do? You're a
Yeah, and this entire argument of the caste census, they are trying to do this. They'll figure out very few people have actually benefited from it, and then the solution that we'll propose is that we need to expand the reservation rather than contracting it. That this is a failed policy. If a policy fails for 70 years, 75 years, 80 years, or 100 years, it is a flop policy. I mean to say, if you make a mistake, if you make a mistake again and you keep making the mistake for 75 years, you wouldn't think that if I try it for in the 81st year, then it will possibly succeed. So this logic is entirely flawed.
What do you gain by looking at the facts? You don't know what the facts are going to turn out to be. Are you going to bet your career on how the facts are going to turn out? Right now, for example, since they've eliminated affirmative action at the University of California system, I have been trying to get data on what about the graduation rate of black students now. At least one region of the university has tried to get that data.
The UC system eliminated affirmative action, what was that, about 4 years ago, Tom?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, fine, go ahead.
And so
In other words, there's time for results to have come in.
That's right. And people like myself have been saying for years that if you allow blacks to redistribute themselves within the system, each one going to the university for which he's normally qualified, you're going to have a higher graduation rate. And graduation is what it's about. It's not about being on campus so the administration can gush about diversity. It's so these guys can...
This is what the political class is trying to achieve. They are basically trying to make themselves feel good that we have done something, that people from underprivileged backgrounds are coming here, never caring about whether they actually graduate or not, or how do they feel when they have come in? Do they really get intangible benefits out of it?
Education and go out in the world and get the advantage of that. That data is not available. Nobody can pry it loose. The same thing is true in the University of Texas system. I mean, imagine
These are public institutions.
That's right. But imagine you're head of the University of Texas. You don't need data coming out saying, my God, now that you got rid of affirmative action, black graduation rates have shot up. Because then you've been saying all along that this is a wonderful thing for blacks. You got too much invested to take that kind of risk.
What do you do about it, Tom?
You stop it.
You stop it.
And only stopping it will work. This notion that a few years ago, you could mend it, not end it, and so forth, you can't.
You reject that out of hand.
Absolutely, because there's been so many undercover ways of doing these things that have already been used. It's clear that people, and it's not just here in India, everywhere, that as long as you allow people wiggle room, they're going to wiggle.
Yeah, that is why it simply doesn't make any sense to debate about what percentage of what he should have, what particular committee should have. There will always be some loose end. You will always end up trying to fill it, and there will always be some problem that will keep coming. And the objective that we are trying to achieve, which is upliftment for everyone, that will never be achieved because we are talking about the wrong policy. The policy should be, why are we not so industrialized that enough people have jobs?
The recent Supreme Court case on affirmative action programs at the University of Michigan, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor writes, quote, "We expect that 25 years from now, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary," close quote.
They expected that 25 years ago, and they will probably be expecting that 25 years from now.
And we had reservations. We have reservation for 75 years. And if we continue on this track, we'll have them for another 75 years. Then possibly for another 75 years. Okay, so now I'll take audience questions. So this is all new to me, so don't mind my speaking skills are not up to the mark, and I am definitely when I'll do this more frequently, then I'll be able to be able to entertain you better and do this in a much more organized manner. So just give me some wiggle room. I can sing, and politics doesn't need to be serious. Like to say, yeah, the matter is serious, but it is better to have light-hearted debates and think about things in a light manner as compared to being completely stuck in a position and holding it so near and dear to you that your existence depends on it. The tensions aside, let's have a cool head and think about it. That we all agree that this is a problem and this needs to be solved, and let's try to work on discourse, exchange ideas, and see what the best policy is. Because we all want good for the society as a whole. And I think with this premise, let's start with if any one of you has any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think I'll end this live stream for today. Thank you all for joining. See you all next week. We'll keep doing them weekly, and trying to break down difficult policy positions and trying to break them down so in a way that you can argue your case against affirmative action and why it needs to be stopped and why there are better ways to achieve the same objectives that we are all trying to talk about. Proponents of affirmative action presume that it helps its recipients. Even opponents tend to focus on the harm it does to those who don't receive it. Yeah, the the entire discourse right now is about why is everyone is the and that's the discourse has an agreement that reservation does lead to upliftment, and I want it for my community and me. While in actuality, it doesn't lead to the level of upliftment you think it does until unless there is some corruption going on. But still, everyone thinks that it is their ticket to heaven, and which it simply isn't. Yeah. So, if anyone of you has any questions, please put them, or I'll put it into the stream. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So, anyways, thank you all. Thanks for joining, and see you all next week. We'll keep doing them regularly, and let's have a healthy debate about these things rather than shouting over each other, and think it through that what are the objectives we are trying to achieve and how will we achieve it. Okay, here is a question that how would you dismantle reservation from India without shackling the rural class? By increasing urbanization and industrialization so that we have very few people left in those areas, and we have there we all can agree that casteism is much more of a rural phenomena as compared to urban phenomena, and when we have high level of urbanization and cosmopolitan culture comes in, then we'll have less of these problems. So the Thomas Sowell video that we did, it didn't talk about the things that happened in Japan. So Japan also had a caste problem, and it had a similar untouchables problem. When the conducting and it also had some reservations, but it isn't talked about that much because Japan is seen as a modern industrial economy with almost 40,000 per capita GDP. So economic growth is the best way to uplift people out of poverty, and the best way to implement economic growth to achieve economic growth is through free markets and economic freedom. And 1991 reforms have been able to do more upliftment for the backward castes as compared to any of the reservation policies that was implemented. So yeah, 1990 reforms have made Mandelites confused on the cause and effect on upliftment of OBC. Yeah, definitely. The 1990 the attribution that should have been given to the rising level of prosperity that everyone has attained is because of the economic the liberalization, privatization, and globalization reforms that were done in 1991. Those were the reforms that led to India achieving 7% or 6 to 7% annual growth. That has resulted in a doubling of the GDP and us finally reaching crossing the 5 trillion mark. So this is just a swindle done by politicians to justify just to break people into caste blocks and try to achieve their votes. That's it. It's just a political swindle. It is a flop policy. It doesn't achieve any of the objective that we all agree that the society should achieve of a healthy, prosperous society without any discrimination. Okay. I think we are done with the comments, and it's over an hour. So thank you all for joining. See you all next week. Adios.